Hey everybody, happy Friday. Hopefully everybody had a good trading week. Wanted to do a market update since the season 4 for TrendSpider stock trading pit is now closed, so we'll just be doing weekend videos for a few weeks. Starting with SPY, we're going to do a couple broad market ETFs as always, and then go over a couple individual names that look interesting going into the week ahead. So starting with SPY, you can see here on the daily chart on Wednesday and Thursday, things were looking a little iffy, I have to admit, with the Fed talking about, we may start tapering this year. Yeah, they're most of the time full of it. And you already had today one of the Fed chairs coming out and saying, maybe I take that back. So classic reaction by the market, and then the Fed kind of taking back almost what they said. So let's see what happens going into the next week or so in regards to that. But all in all, we did hold above the July 19th pivot here, the anchored VWAP from that pivot point. And that was the main thing to watch. Now, we did kind of hit this volume shelf here, which acted as initial supply, and then it actually became a nice base for price to move up really strongly into Friday. So that is the daily side of things. Obviously, the main area we want to look for is that 447.05 or so area above, which is just the previous high. Nothing too technical about that other than looking at just regular price action pivots here. Right around 447 would be a target above if we do continue up. Now on the weekly side of things, this is definitely something that I did start to look at a little bit. Simply the fact that we are hitting lower highs on the 2-month RSI. So if you see here, I'm using the 8 RSI, that's looking back 8 weeks, 2 months or so. And so that's why I'm using the 8 instead of, let's say, the 14 or the 10. The 10 is something that I use on the daily because we're looking back in that case, 2 weeks. So all in all, you can see here that we do have the higher highs and then the lower highs on the RSI. Now, the reason why I pointed out what we have here back in earlier in the year, we did have a little bit of a pullback after divergence here, but notice what happened. We just continued to move up. So just because you have divergence doesn't really mean a ton over the longer term. It just means maybe we have a little bit of a road block or a speed bump going into the next couple weeks. But all in all, nothing really out of the ordinary here other than the fact that we've just kind of grinded higher and we continue to kind of melt up. The last week was definitely a little bit of a melt up, so not shocking that we did get a little bit of a pullback this week. But all in all, we do have the lower highs on the RSI, something to consider on the bear case. Bull case, the fact that we did close really strong on Friday and we do have new all-time highs in sight would be your bull case. So going into the Qs, the Qs actually look a little stronger than SPY here in kind of my perspective, simply because we do have the ascending triangle forming here. We've got 3 points here on the trend line. You can see here that we are going to retest those highs if we do continue up next week. And the main thing that I want to point out here is the fact that the 1.618 extension from this measured move back in February and March of 2021, you can see that we're really holding right at this 1.618 extension, and this is now held for literally over a month, actually almost 6 weeks at this point. So all in all, this is kind of consolidation. We'll have to see if it's consolidation or distribution, but I do think we're probably going to continue higher. Now the bear case here would be if the RSI negative divergence does start to follow through. And you can see here that we do have these higher highs barely over the last 5 weeks, and then you can see the RSI does have a lower high here, and we did tick down this week. So bull case versus bear case. Bull case, we're holding the 1.618 for the last 6 weeks, and we're kind of consolidating here. Bear case, you do have that negative divergence. Now going into the small caps, IWM. This is one that's really interesting here. So we'll look at kind of two perspectives. Starting with the weekly chart, you'll see here if I turn on multi-time frame analysis, which just allows me to look at the weekly Bollinger Band on the daily chart, you'll see here that we were a little overextended to the downside with that daily price action below the weekly Bollinger Band. So you can see the last time that happened back in mid-July, we did have a nice move to the upside up to the 20-day SMA above, which is this blue line. Excuse me, that's the 20-week SMA since we're looking at the weekly Bollinger Band. So you can see here that we moved up and then we pretty much hit this multiple times before reversing. And then now we're back down to the lower Bollinger Band. So will we bounce? We'll have to see. The weekly chart is something to consider here. We do kind of have this rounded top. Now, I'm not incredibly bearish on small caps simply because if you go to the monthly chart, you'll see here that we're simply, over the longer term, really just retesting this previous breakout trend line. So you can see here that we've really had this area be resistance multiple times over the last 2 decades. And you can see here that we did finally break out of it earlier this year, and now we're kind of just retesting it. So bull case on IWM is simply the fact that we're just retesting this breakout point. And then the bear case would be more on the weekly side, where we do kind of have this rounded top forming where we have had pretty strong pullbacks in the past. You do have this gap way down here in the 160s, 150, upper 150s, 160s. So definitely keep that in mind on the bear case side of things. But all in all, this is classic kind of the market trying to figure out, are we distributing? Are we accumulating? Definitely literally 9 months almost of no direction at all. So let's see what happens here. This is definitely going to be interesting. If we do break these lows, that's something to keep in mind. Let's say right around 207.50. If we break down through that on the weekly chart, that may signal a bigger move in the overall markets. We'll just have to see how that plays out. All we can do is look at price action and go from there. There's no predicting in this game. If you try to predict, then sure you can, but if you try to predict and then you don't take in the most recent price action, then you have to change your thesis, and that's the whole thing. People come up with a thesis and then they don't change it based on more recent and updated price action. Then you're almost using data that's old. You have to take in everything into account. Anytime prices do something, you have to take that into account, and that's what we'll be watching for on IWM. Now, looking at Bitcoin real quick, we'll just look at Bitcoin. I don't want to go too deep into crypto. Bitcoin's kind of your proxy for most crypto. Let's go to the Coinbase chart. And you'll see here kind of the main thing that I'm watching is the fact that, one, we're still above the all-time high anchored VWAP. We also are pretty much right at this area, which was previous support, now acting as potential resistance. So you kind of have this SR flip here, and we'll see if we can actually get through it. Now, on the weekly chart, you'll see that we do have these all-time high anchored VWAP as well. You can see that a little clearer. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we have had 5 green weeks in a row, assuming that this week is green for Bitcoin. So remember, Bitcoin does not close on Friday like the stock market. It closes on Sunday. So we do still have some time. I made this video on Friday afternoon. So just keep that in mind that by the time maybe you see this on Sunday, price action will definitely have evolved more, and you'll have to take that into account. But all in all, the main area that you definitely want to get through is right around this 49K. 50K is your psychological level above that you'll also want to keep in mind going forward. Now, let's look at a couple individual names, starting with Apple. Apple's one that has really been stuck now for about 5 weeks. So you can see here that we did have a little bit of a false breakout earlier in the week. We pulled back. We're stuck in this range once again. And until we break out of this range, we're kind of just range bound, hence why we're calling it just a 5-week range. So keep in mind, let's say right around this previous high, around 152 would be possibly, it would be your level for possibly higher moves to the upside. Now, on the weekly chart, if we anchor the volume by price from the March lows here, you'll see we've got quite a big volume shelf forming here. And you can see that I actually highlighted this green because we did close higher than a majority of this shelf. So anytime you follow my charts and you'll see a yellow, or you'll see a red, or you'll see a green shaded volume shelf, that just shows kind of where we are. Anytime you have a close above a majority of the shelf, I'm going to highlight it green because we're above that area. Anytime we're trading right within that shelf, I'm going to highlight it orange because we're kind of trying to get through that supply. And anytime that you have the price, let's say way down here, and then your volume shelf is above, that's definitely going to be shaded in red because it's a supply zone. Those shares above are going to be back to break even if the price gets back there, and that's why it's going to act as initial supply. So that's Apple. Moving on, let's look at Spotify. Spotify's been one that's been on my radar for quite some time. And you'll see here that we did have a nice falling wedge breakout here. You'll see that this may just be getting started. And the area that you'd want to watch above is just the swing high anchor VWAP here, which is right around, let's say, 230, 231. And then on the weekly chart, you'll see here that if we get rid of the volume by price, we have bounced off this support multiple times in the past over the last year and a half or so, and we did close very strongly for the week. A nice hammer there forming. So all in all, this is looking relatively strong going into the week ahead with that close. Now, going into PENN, this is one that I really didn't think would hold its level here. We kind of have this inverse head and shoulders. I'm going to go ahead and say I was wrong about this one. I did have a position open. I closed it. However, I do think that based on this daily candle here, that's a pretty strong move. Now, the one thing, you always have to look at the bear case as well. The one thing to consider is we do have this falling wedge, and you do have support way down here, almost near that COVID low anchor VWAP, which is right around 55 or so. So if this really does not break out in the coming weeks, that's something that you definitely need to consider. Now, if we anchored the volume by price from the COVID lows, you'll see here that we do have a little bit of, this is what I would highlight as yellow, right? I just kind of went over the different colors. I'd highlight it as yellow because we are kind of in the middle of the shelf. We definitely need to break above this shelf to really get going. So I'm going to highlight that as yellow for now. It definitely wouldn't be highlighted as green. I'd highlight this shelf as green if we actually close above, let's say around 72. So 72 would be the area to watch above for a continuation higher. Now, if you look at the MACD, you do have the MACD curling here as well. Now, keep in mind the MACD can do some crazy things, especially, when you do have a little bit of a tick down like we had this week. But all in all, we are starting to see that histogram start to move up, which simply means that the blue line here is getting closer to the signal, which is the yellow line. And that's something to keep in mind for possibly a trend reversal after really, almost over a 50% drop from the highs back in springtime. So this is one to definitely keep an eye on if it can break above that 72 volume shelf. Another one that I've been watching is GRWG. This thing got absolutely destroyed by earnings, but notice what happens here. You've got the volume weighted average price from the COVID lows, this area that I'm highlighting by this green circle here. That's the COVID lows, so that's what we're going to anchor the volume weighted average price at. And you'll see that we literally bounced off of it how many days? 4 days this week. So only Monday was the only day that we didn't really interact with that volume weighted average price. Now, we didn't get it all the way to the cent, and you're never going to get anything all the way to the cent. We missed it by, let's say, around maybe 50 cents or so. But all in all, the fact that we did close within this daily wick is something to consider. Definitely not proving itself fully yet, but something to consider that we have caught a bid, or at least supply has dried up right around this area. Now, the next leg would be possibly that demand coming in to push this higher. The main area you want to watch for is right around 31. Let's call it 31. And that's really just these previous highs here. So it's not going to be perfect right at 31, but if we show the price, this is right around $30.50. So keep in mind, if we do close above $30.50 on GRWG, that would possibly signal a bigger reversal. We also have the gap above right around 40 all the way to around 42, and that is what I've highlighted here in orange. Now, on the weekly side of things, if we get rid of the MACD and just kind of look at the overall chart here, let's get rid of the volume by price as well. You'll see here that we have a couple levels. One, you kind of have this massive bull flag forming. I mean, this is pretty impressive. You've got this just absolutely straight up move. You've got this flag forming. You've got the price right kind of near this previous trend line support. And now, if this does break to the downside, look for possibly 20 to 23 bucks below. And that's simply just these previous highs here that would act as potential support after they acted as resistance for multiple years before we finally broke out. So that would be the level to watch. This trend line below. And remember, these are always a function of time. But if we break below the anchored VWAP, which is right around that 28 area, that's when things may get a little hairy to the downside. But for now, holding pretty well. We've had quite a massive drop from earnings, and this may have a little bit of a relief bounce. Let's just see what price action tells us. Next one is NVDA, NVIDIA. What an absolute just ripper. So on the daily side of things, you can see here that we do have this trend line breakout here. We closed above this resistance line. And then on the weekly chart, you'll see here that we really do, let me see if I can get my, I may have accidentally deleted these, but we'll do it in real time. So this is what I'm looking at, right? We've got this previous area that we broke out through here on the weekly chart. So I'm just going to kind of draw this here. You kind of got whatever you want to call this, kind of a flaggish type pattern that we broke out through. And then you kind of got that same type of thing showing up here over the last couple weeks. And notice what happened here. We actually kind of broke out, pulled back, retested this previous resistance, acted as support, and then closed near the high of the week. I mean, this is really, really strong stuff. Let me just let my OCD do its thing real quick, and we'll make these nice and pretty, make these a little thicker. But you can see here that, I mean, this thing is unstoppable, really. There's not really, you know, a bear thesis here at this point, other than the fact that if the market does start to pull back, maybe it affects it. But this thing is just on such a strong bull run. I don't see a lot of things getting in the way, but always keep in mind the market, the overall market can really change things up if, let's say, you know, the Qs and SPYs start to tank. Now, a lot of that can be a function of the stocks in the Qs. So, you know, what happens first? The Qs and SPY drop, or the stocks in those indices start dropping. So all in all, I mean, if I were to take a wild guess at where this goes, all I'm doing is I'm using the measured move here. And notice that I only have the 1.618 extension up because I just don't like using the 0 and the 1, which measures the move. But you'll see here that if we highlight the level here, that 1.618 extension is right around 227.35. Let's just call it 227.50. And this is definitely one of my favorite charts going into the week ahead. The last one that we'll do is PLTR, simply because so many people are interested in this one. And it did have a nice move up over the last couple weeks. Now, keep in mind, you do have this gap below. The gap below is definitely on the bear case going into next week. And then the bull case here is simply the fact that we did technically break out of this symmetrical triangle here. And really, we're just trying to get through this volume shelf. So if we anchor the volume by price from the IPO, we would definitely highlight this as orange because we're still kind of stuck in it. The market is still digesting this supply. Remember, when the price is way down at 21 and people are in at 25, you know, as the price gets back to 25, a lot of people are going to definitely break even sell, take some off the table, and that adds supply onto the market, and that's how this becomes initial resistance. So all in all, gap below, you do have the volume shelf. We'd really want to see a close above this area, which is right around, let's say, 26, and that's kind of the top of the volume shelf there. So that is all. Hopefully this video was helpful. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. We'll be doing them more as we kind of have ended the Stock Trading Pit Season 4, and as we ramp up into October, we will be doing these weekend videos in replacement of those Sunday shows. So thank you everybody for watching. I hope this was helpful, and hopefully everybody has a great weekend.